Okay, we're gonna get started then. Hopefully others are going to join soon. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your faithfulness uh, in our good days and in our challenging days. We know we can count on you. We can rest in you. And tomorrow will be another day. And your mercies are new every morning. Thank you for your faithfulness. Uh, as we gather together uh, around your word and to open it up, we want you to be the one, Father, to teach us, to speak to us, to instruct us and equip us, that we may live a life that's more pleasing to you and more peaceful to us, and also that reflects who you are for the blessing of others as well. We thank you, and we rejoice in the beauty of your word, and captivate us, captivate our attention to adore you and to serve you. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we are ready to get started. Um, Tonight is going to be, I think it's going to be a short night. And the reason is that I'm not feeling the greatest. I have allergies. I'm not really an allergy kind of a person, but something's got me. And yesterday I had a meeting with a friend over the phone, lasted for about an hour. And 45 minutes into it, I was done. I just like, I wanted to say, okay, you know what, I'm tired. And so I suspect that doing so much talking tonight is also going to have a similar effect. So I am going to just get to the minimum and and hopefully I won't get too tired. Okay, so we are in the book of Joshua. We finished the Torah. We're in the book of Joshua, but we know that from our studies that the plot of the Torah does not have an end with Deuteronomy, but it actually goes into Joshua. And this is a clever way uh, for the Lord to bring unity between the Torah and the prophets. As you know, the Joshua is the beginning of the prophets. And so by concluding the Torah in the prophets, then there's a unity. I like to call it an organic unity between the two groups of books, right? So from now on, we are in the former prophets and then in the latter prophets, hopefully later. But the the fact that the Torah ends in the prophets, it just brings unity to the two, because we're going to see how Joshua is going to pivot towards the future based on the conclusion of the Torah in the prophets. So it's just a beautiful way of connecting the two. As we always do, we're going to begin with a continuation from the previous book. Then we'll see the literary structure and then the plot structure. So the continuation from Deuteronomy and the Torah. So Joshua has an independent beginning to what is still a narrative continuation. So I'm trying to speak out of both sides of my mouth here because I want to say that Joshua is independent, yet at the same time, it is dependent. So although it starts with a preterite, and the preterite is the Hebrew type of verb that is a simple past in which we tell stories, in which the Bible tells stories. So usually when a book starts with the preterite, that means there is strong continuation. That's what we saw with Exodus, with Leviticus, and with numbers, that they are a continuation from the previous book. And this is that the preterite has the prefix vav, which simply means in Hebrew, it means and, right? So, and so, and this happened. And the Lord called to Moses. So Joshua begins with and, however, it uses a specific type of preterite, which is the vayehi. The vayehi is the to be verb in Hebrew, come from haya, right? When we sing kadosh, we sing that little part, asher haya, the one who is, right? Who is, who was, who is, and is to come. And so because of this vayehi is actually a special type of preterite that it is used to begin new narratives. So in a sense, this is the part where I say it has an independent start, even though it is a preterite. So it shares both. It is independent, but it also has some flavor of continuation. This verb is typically translated as, and it came about, right? I think that sounds more like King James Bible, right? And it came about that's this vayehi. So in other words, Joshua continues the narrative, but with a new section, a new beginning. Joshua also has thematic continuation with the Torah and Genesis through Deuteronomy. So Joshua has an obvious connection to Genesis. Pretty much every book in the Bible is going to have a connection to Genesis. Why? Because they're all based on the promises that God made to the patriarchs, the promise of the land that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But there's a less obvious connection between Joshua and the Torah and Genesis. And it is that in Joshua, Judah and Joseph are preeminent in the conquest and the distribution of the land. So we're going to see that in a moment. That's a connection with Genesis that is not so obvious. But with Exodus, the connection is obvious, right? Because it's going to talk a lot about the Exodus itself and a lot about the tabernacle. So Joshua, the Ark of the Tabernacle is very prominent. We know they are going to cross the Jordan with the Ark of the Covenant going in front of them, right? Remember, the priest, they have to begin walking in the waters of the Jordan. I don't know how the Jordan is around Jericho, right? That's where they cross. When I went to the Jordan, I didn't go to the typical site, that looks nice and, it looks like a beach. People have worked on it. I went way, way, way up north. And up there is all stones. It's all rocks. So hopefully it wasn't rocky, but I suspect that it was, which would have made it very challenging to carry the ark. To carry anything would have been a challenge, but to carry the ark, I can't imagine the responsibility that they felt carrying the ark, crossing the Jordan. But what an awesome picture, right? Okay, so Joshua also has connections with Leviticus, the sacrifices and the priesthood. That's going to be very important also in Joshua. But the strongest connection, actually, that Joshua has are to Numbers and Deuteronomy. So up to Joshua 8:29, and you can read this. As a matter of fact, to my students at the seminary, I recommend that they listen. They listen to the biblical books. Number one, because it's faster. You can't stop it. So you can, when you're reading, you stop, you think, you meditate, you forget. you reread and then you feel like, oh man, I'm not gonna get through this. So I recommend that if you go to YouTube, you type in Book of Joshua, and you can even choose your translation. They have several options there. So for me, I go and look for the New American Standard Bible, Book of Joshua. And then you can adjust the speed in YouTube. And maybe a book that will take, I don't know, an hour and a half. You can cut it in half and get a sense that you understand the whole story together. And from time to time, you hear things, details that are going to stick in your mind. Well, if you read the book, then you're going to see that up to Joshua 8:29, the book features the holy war and the holy and war camp from the book of Numbers. Remember that from the book of Numbers? Uh, in the book of Numbers, the first half of the book, I guess the first third of the book, it's going to talk about how the camp of Israel is a holy camp because the tabernacle is in the middle of it. The presence of God is in the middle of it. But it is also a war camp, right? They're counting the men of war 20 years and up. And the arrangement of the camp is a military arrangement. So up to Joshua 8:29, the book of Joshua talks a lot about the camp in these two ways. It's a holy camp and it's a military camp. We know this because, well, they are going to make war on the Canaanites, right? But also the ark is always ahead in everything they do with the priests. A small detail that, I don't know, escaped me, so I think escapes a lot of people too, is that the ones who were walking around Jericho for the first few days, the first 6 days, I think it was, they were actually the priests. It wasn't everybody. It was the priests carrying the ark, walking around Jericho. Uh, so that right there, it tells you this is an act of war, but with shofars, with the ark of God. Yeah, because the Lord is the mighty warrior. I compare it uh, to Goliath. I don't know if you remember Goliath, which we're gonna talk about that next week. I'm sorry, in a couple of weeks in First Samuel. Goliath will come out for 40 days. He will come out and taunt the armies of Israel and challenge them to a duel and all this. And everybody was afraid, including Saul, of course, until David came along. But I liken this, the ark of God surrounding Jericho, like kind of like Goliath. He is the mighty warrior. He's the man of war, and he is uh, going around Jericho. The war is the Lord's war. He is the one who is going to fight for Israel. But then, starting in Joshua 8:30, then you begin to see a change. You begin to see features of Deuteronomy's exhortation and covenant themes. Um, I was not looking for that, but when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. It was like, wow, this is real. This is right there, and it's I think it's very important to be able to see how Joshua depends on both, depends on Numbers, but also depends on the book of Deuteronomy in such a unique way. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to find my way. Uh, let's see. I'm gonna have to stop this. My bad. Okay, now let's come back. Okay, sorry about that. Um, All right, so that is the thematic continuation, right? So we see connections from Joshua to every book of the Torah. Now we see that most importantly, there is plot continuation. For those of you who arrived a little late, if you hear that I don't have the same energy as usual, it's because I'm having allergy issues and I'm not feeling the greatest. And we may not go for as long as always that we always do tonight, because when you talk, you use a lot of energy in the and I suspect that at one point I'm just gonna crash and be done. Okay, so the plot continuation between the Torah and Joshua is highly important. We have been talking about this from the very beginning, from Genesis. And so as we have seen, the Torah does not have within the Torah, a climax, a resolution, a consequence, or a conclusion. They all occur in Joshua, meaning these are the ending aspects of the plot of the Torah itself. So there obviously will be plot continuation between the Torah and Joshua. Scholars have considered that Joshua should be taken together with the Torah. So instead of talking of Pentateuch, remember the word penta means 5, Pentateuch, they talk about a hexateuch, which means the 6 books. So they want to lump together Joshua with Deuteronomy and the rest of the Torah. But they say that based on the content of Joshua, not based on the macro plot of the Torah. The macro plot of the Torah gives us a better understanding of the role of Joshua, right? So it's basically it is more satisfying from the point of view of a history of a story. It is more satisfying to keep the suspense. You know, think of the Torah as season 1. Think of your favorite show, season 1. The prophets is going to be season 2, the former prophets, right? Joshua through Kings. Well, it so happens that season 1 ends and you did not have a resolution. It left them with this tension. Is Israel ever going to enter the land? Well, you're going to have to come back for season 2, because in the first episode of season 2, Joshua, that's where you're going to get the ending of the Torah. I think that's genius. How much more so that God is the prime storyteller. So I think understanding the plot structure of the Torah helps us understand, no, it is the way it is, and the way it should be, because from a standpoint of storytelling, it is more rhetorical to do this. Rhetoric has to do with how to convince someone of an idea. So I have an idea, I want to convince you, but what should be the best way for me to present it in order to convince you of this idea? Maybe if I give you $100 bill, you will be like, "Ooh, yeah, I want to hear you. You know, I want to agree with you," right? So that's a rhetorical device. Of course, that's not what I do, because I don't have hundreds of dollars. But so this literary curve, in a way, that the scripture throws at us by not concluding the Torah at the end of the Torah, is actually the way it should be. It's more satisfying from the standpoint of storytelling. And of course, we know here we have what we're talking about, the not only the structure of plot, but the plot as we have it up to now, up to Deuteronomy, right? So we have the context in Genesis 1, the seed theme, the conflict, which is the inciting incident, which is Genesis 3, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. So we see the continuation of this theme of the seed beginning in Genesis 1. Then we have an escalation in Genesis 10. How come the seed of the serpent, Canaan, has possession of the land? That shouldn't be. So we have a crisis then in Numbers 13 and 14. Because here is when Israel should have come in, confronted the Canaanites, have a confrontation, and expelled them from the land. That would have been the resolution for them to take possession of the land. But it doesn't happen. So now we have a crisis. Israel refused to dispossess the Canaanites, right? So this is the moment in the story where we say, wow, this movie is so good. I have no idea what's going to happen. How is this ever going to happen? That's when Deuteronomy comes in, and Deuteronomy is a restatement of the plot, of the conflict, specifically the conflict. Because Deuteronomy is going to be all about giving exhortation and giving commandments. Remember, every time we have a commandment, an exhortation, it creates tension because nobody knows if you're going to do it or not, right? And so this is Israel's second generation exhorted to dispossess the Canaanite. So we see the connection there to Numbers. So this is a restatement of the conflict in the second generation. But then we don't get the climax in Deuteronomy or the consequence or the conclusion. They are all in Joshua. So we are finally at Joshua. So after we see the macro plot of Joshua, then we will see the completed macro plot of the Torah with Joshua's contribution. So we're going to return to this format at the end and finish it, fill it out. Before we do that, then, as we always do, we're going to talk about the literary structure. The literary structure is how the content is arranged in the book in order to tell the story. And here we see 5 different sections, big sections in the book. So we'll go over those first. First, number 1 is Israel enters the land. That's what we have in the first 5 chapters. Then we go to Israel dispossess the inhabitants of the land, not only the Canaanites, but the Amorites and the Jebusites and all that. So Israel enters, dispossesses the inhabitants of the land, and then Israel possesses the land. They take possession of the land, and the land is distributed. Then Israel is going to be warned against apostasy, and they are going to swear allegiance to God. You know, this is the famous, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. What about you, Israel? And they're going to take an oath that they will also serve the Lord. And then we conclude with the death and burial of Joshua, the burial of Joseph. Oh, remember Joseph. Joseph said, you know, when I die, please keep my bones like the Egyptians do, but don't leave me in Egypt. You know, take me with you. And Moses did. They took Moses's coffin with them when they left Egypt in the Exodus. And now we are told, finally in Joshua, we are told that they buried Joseph in the land of Israel. Pretty cool detail. And then we conclude with the death of Eliezer, which is the son of Aaron, the priest, and then his son Eliezer's son is going to be the new high priest, moving forward into the book of Judges. So that is the literary structure, the arrangement of the book, right? We can go into details into each one so that we see the story, but because I need to save my energy, I'm not going to talk about these details. They are easy enough. Basically, Again, I recommend read the book, do it on YouTube, find a YouTube video of the reading of the book and read it along with this so you can see this summary of each chapter, and that helps you have a handle, so to speak, on each chapter so that you can see how the whole thing comes together. The only thing I'm going to say, or maybe just a couple of things here to say, is that when we talk about Israel dispossessing the inhabitants of the land, notice that we have three campaigns. Number one is the central campaign, military campaign, right? Then the southern campaign, and then the northern campaign. Then we have a review of the victories, which it gives us two lists of the conquered areas, the cities they conquered, and the kings that they conquered. And we'll see in a moment how that is significant. But I thought it was pretty cool to see how they carried out the campaigns to confront the Canaanites. When you know the geography of Israel, you realize, that Jericho is really right around the middle. It's just north of Jerusalem, but south of the Galilee. So you have all the region of the Galilee up in the north. Then you have the central areas, which today really is a lot of it is Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, which obviously Israel does not have full possession of it. But that's where these lands will be. So Jericho today is part of the Palestinian territory, which really isn't. So I've been to Jericho, and I did the walk, half of the walk from Jericho to Jerusalem. So we walked all the way up. You walk up, and then when you are within the area of Jerusalem, then you start going down a little bit toward the city itself. But I mean, this is a huge walk because you're basically going from the Jordan, because Jericho is close to the Jordan and is at the level of the Jordan, and then you're going up, and so it's an awesome walk when you're young and you can do it. So not sure I could right now. So they attack these lands, these people that live in the central area of the land. Then they head south for the southern campaign, and then they go back up to the north through the coast. So this will be the movement that they did. And I thought that was cool too, just to know that, how they went about that, right? All right. Let's see, there was something else. We're going to talk about this warning and this allegiance, because this is going to be important. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about the plot structure of Joshua. So Joshua is primarily historical narrative, which means that it has plot, which is the universal structure of stories. And we have seen this in every class, the plot structure, which is context, conflict, climax with resolution, and consequence and conclusion. Of course, you always hear me talking about this at Sukkot. So and so what we do then is to take the literary structure, right, all of the content of the book, and we find how does it fit into the plot structure. So in case that you ever wanted to do this, you take your plot structure and you start thinking about, you need to do the literary structure first, get all of the chapters, describe them, see what goes together, find commentaries if it helps. I'm not against commentaries, but you need to know how to use them. And then so you come up with a literary structure, and then you try to fit that into the plot structure. Let me show you how I typically do it. Because we have the plot structure of Joshua here, right? So what I do is I first try to find the conflict. And the conflict is going to be the first sign of problems. You know, we start reading, and when we read about the conquest of the land, well, the entrance of Israel into the land, everything is perfect. There's nothing wrong. Israel doesn't do anything bad. So for 5 chapters, there's no conflict. So I keep going. I keep reading. And then I remember that every time there's a command, that's my conflict. So that's the first sign of conflict. When Israel is commanded to take Jericho. Okay, so it's not a big conflict. And by the way, Joshua is not going to be big in this area in conflict. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you go back on my notes, or in the teaching itself, the recordings, you're going to see that every one of the books that we've seen has a different emphasis. Deuteronomy emphasized conflict. Everything was conflict. Guess why? Because there's so much commandments in Deuteronomy, so it's all about conflict and tension, right? And similarly, all of these books, they have kind of like a different emphasis in the part of the plot. Well, for Joshua, the conflict is definitely not his big thing. He's got other important things to emphasize. And so the conflict in Joshua really isn't that big. So we have the inciting incident, I call it the incitement here to save space, is that Israel is commanded to take Jericho. Then we have a complication 1. Israel is defeated by Ai. Ooh, this is the big one, right? Remember Achan? He takes the Babylonian mantle and the gold and the silver and all that stuff. He's going to bury it under his tent. And that's not going to be good for him or his family. So that's an escalation of the conflict. That's a complication. Then we get another complication in the fact that Israel is deceived by the Gibeonites. The text says that Joshua and the leaders, they did not consult with the Lord. Wow. And so they're deceived by these people, and the Lord told them, don't make covenants with these people. But so that's a complication right there. You see, it's not a huge deal. Nothing super bad comes from that. So that's why, because Joshua is not big on the conflict. There aren't a lot of problems in Joshua. But what's important to Joshua is the climax and the consequence. That's what's important to Joshua. Why? Because we are at the end of the story that came from the Torah, and what we're lacking is the climax and the consequence and the conclusion. That's where Joshua is huge. So first of all, the confrontation here is actually also kind of anticlimactic, because here Israel defeats the inhabitants of the land, as we see it in the literary structure. Israel dispossesses the inhabitants of the land from chapter 6 all the way to chapter 12. But we've seen that part of this is, and even up to here, all of this is the part of the conflict, right? When Israel is defeated by Ai, and when Israel is deceived by the Gibeonites. So that then what we have then is chapters 10 to 12 is the actual confrontation, or the not the actual, because it began with Jericho, right? But this is where the book is going to show us the greater detail of how Israel went in and defeated the people of the land. After they were deceived by the Gibeonites, They turned out and they defeated a whole lot of people that came to attack Israel as a result of the incident with the Gibeonites. And so that's where we see Israel taking on king after king after king, group after group, city after city after city, and he's defeating them all of them. It's like, this is easy. But that's what God told them that it was going to be. I'm going ahead of you. I'm the one who is going to fight. You just need to show up. You didn't show up the first time, and you pay the consequences. And so that's what we see in the conflict here. The climax, which is the confrontation, the climax. Israel defeats the inhabitants of the land. But there is also a resolution. Remember that climax always has a resolution attached with it. So the resolution here is also a huge section, lots of chapters here. This is Israel takes possession of the land. Now, here's the thing. In every story, you have the conflict, right? It begins to rise until it gets to the point where there is the confrontation, the climax. And then the climax leads to a resolution. But what is resolved? What's resolved is not only this confrontation of the climax, but the confrontation of the climax is tied to the conflict. So this resolution resolves not only the confrontation of the climax, but the whole conflict. All of this is going to have the resolution here. So the resolution relates to the climax, but it also relates to the conflict. What is the conflict of the Torah? That the Canaanites are having possession of the land. We got to resolve this. What's the resolution then? What's going to resolve it? That Israel now takes possession of the land. You see how magnificent it is. This is no coincidence that it's no coincidence that the resolution of Joshua, which ends up being the resolution of the Torah, is that Israel takes possession of the land. Because the problem was that the Canaanites had possession of the land. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And then we still have the consequence. Remember, the consequence is where the theological message of a story is. Why? Because it's what is the truth that unveils out of the resolution. The resolution touches on the climax and the conflict, and what follows the resolution is the theological messages. When in the story it tells you this is what the story is all about. Here's the moral of the story. But because this isn't just a little tale, what we get here is the theology of it. Here's the most important message. And now, especially here, this is incredibly, the stakes are as high as they can be, because we're not only talking about the consequence of Joshua, but the consequence of the entire Torah. Wow. What is the message? What is the most important theological message of the Torah, of the whole thing? Not only that, but that Joshua is going to pivot and turn it into the future, into the basis of the prophets. This has got to be huge. It's got to be something huge. Well, we're not let down by Joshua, because the consequence that we see in Joshua is that Israel is warned against apostasy, and they swear allegiance to God. Perhaps you don't see it. Perhaps you see, well, okay, that's kind of important, but here's the thing. This is what the entire Torah has been talking about to Israel. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You shall love the Lord your God. He is the only God. Only he is God. Do not make covenants with any of the nations. They will lead you to be unfaithful to God. They will lead you to apostasy. From Genesis, look at Adam and Eve. They had the land, they had the blessing, but they walked away from God. Don't do that, Israel. And Joshua is saying, I am going to serve God. I am not going to fall for apostasy. What about you, Israel? They swear allegiance. Yeah, we will too. We will too. Now, here's the genius of this consequence. This consequence is also a conflict. It turns into the conflict of the prophets. Why? Because imagine the tension of this. Israel, do not commit apostasy. Do not commit spiritual adultery. Be faithful to God. That's a series of commandments. That is tension. That is conflict. Is Israel going to do this? We've seen this movie. We know what's going to happen. And so the entire message of the Torah ends up being the conflict of the prophets of the next series of books. This is genius.
I have a question about that real quick.
Yes.
Because before you said it, I was thinking the exact same thing, that this isn't the end of the story. Clearly, we know that, and I wondered if it was just setting up. I didn't think about the word conflict, but when you said it, it makes perfect sense. But setting up the season 2, so to speak, maybe. Does the fact that this is the way Joshua ties back to the Torah, I'm not even sure if I'm wording the question exactly the way I mean, but I guess does that enhance the significance of the fact that Joshua and the Torah are linked, so to speak? The fact that it continues on through the rest of the prophets, etc.
Yes, it does, because it makes the Torah super relevant to the prophets, because what the prophets are going to preach is precisely this point. Israel, return, come back to the Lord from your apostasy, and be faithful to the oath that you took to follow the Lord only. So it shows us that the message of the prophets is totally based on Torah, the way it should be.
And so is this consequence also this is also the consequence of the Torah
Yes.
being resolved in itself, in
Yes.
total? Yeah. Okay.
Correct. So we can go now and look at that. See, here now is not the plot of Joshua, but here now is the plot of the whole Torah completed, right? We walk through the first few steps, right? Context is Genesis 1, the seed. The conflict begins in Genesis 3 with the enmity between the seeds. It sees the escalation of Genesis 10, the Canaanites possessing the land. The crisis of Numbers 13 and 14, Israel refusing to dispossess the Canaanite. The restatement of Deuteronomy to the second generation to go in and dispossess the Canaanites. Then we finally see the climax. The climax is that Israel dispossesses the inhabitants of the land. They go in and they make war on the Canaanites. That's the confrontation that we were waiting for the entirety of the Torah, and it didn't happen. Now we have it here in Joshua. Same thing with the resolution. The resolution of the whole Torah is that Israel now takes possession of the land. That's exactly what it should have happened. It's exactly what will reverse the problem of the Torah. That now the people who are blessed, they now have the Holy Land. And then the consequence of the whole Torah, the message of the Torah, is a warning to Israel against apostasy, and Israel's oath of allegiance to God. Are these things going to be fulfilled as we move on into the prophets? That's the suspense. That's the new conflict that we're going to see. And then the Torah concludes with the death and burial of Joshua, Joseph, and Eliezer. Why? Because this signals the end of the second generation with Joshua and Eliezer. And so we are ready for the book of Judges. In a way, the book of Judges is the real beginning of the prophets, because that's where we're going to see, okay, what's going to happen now that Joshua is gone? What's going to happen now that we have this message, this warning to Israel against apostasy, is going to be violated over and over and over in the book of Judges. In this oath of allegiance from Israel to God, is going to be violated over and over and over again in the book of Judges. So in a way, Judges is the real beginning. I guess, Joshua is the real beginning because it sets the foundation, but the house that's going to be built on that foundation begins in Judges. And we couldn't have Judges without this foundation that Joshua puts in, because it's the completion of the foundation, which is the Torah. I mean, the whole thing is so interconnected. It's just amazing. It's genius. It's in terms of literature, it's genius because it's supernatural. It's inspired. And it's God is the real author of Scripture, of the Torah and the prophets. And so, yeah, even the conclusion is fitting because it's the end of the second generation coming from the Exodus, and now we are ready for what comes next. In this test that's over Israel, to see if they're going to be faithful to God, Shema Israel, if they're going to love him like they promise allegiance to him, or if they are going to go astray and commit apostasy against the Lord. And that's the beauty of Joshua. That's what Joshua contributes to Scripture, to be a pivot, concluding the Torah, but beginning the prophets and laying out this amazing foundation. So when we see it this way, it's super, super exciting. And, we go beyond Judges. We go to Samuel and Kings, and we see that the conquest really was never completed, and specifically taking care of the Philistines was never completed until David is going to come. So that's a link, how David fits into this link, from Moses to Joshua to David. David is the one that is going to complete taking possession of the land. And then Solomon has the greatest extended kingdom of Israel, but he's going to commit apostasy, and the whole thing is going to begin to crumble. So I don't know. It's to me, it's the unity is just so beautiful and so amazing. So I think this is all the energy I had. Kind of short today. But I'm going to stop the recording, but we can have a little discussion and take some questions if you have any.